Now we will do the ये तुम्हारी पानी की बोतल है दो बच्चे. Now we will do the GS test 5 cohort 7 solution. Why was the parliamentary form of government chosen over the presidential form by the constitution makers in India? Do you think that the presidentialization of the parliamentary form of government in the recent time threatens the working of Indian polity? In a parliamentary system, thank you, Rituti. In a parliamentary system of the government, the executive is chosen from the legislative, whereas a president form of government is the one where the executive head, the president, is directly elected by the people. The parliamentary form of government was chosen over the presidential form by the constitution makers in India because of accountability, due to colonial experience, India opted for a system of continuous accountability of executive through the parliamentary system. The prior experience. Indian leadership already had some experience of running the parliamentary system under the Acts of 1919 and 1935. ठीक है. The presidential system has the president as the chief executive and as the source of all executive power, therefore, a danger of personality cult to perpetuate existed. And since the executive is a part of the legislature and generally holds the majority, therefore, it is easier to pass the laws and implement them. Reduce possibility of the deadlock between the executive and the legislature. India being a diverse country, parliamentary system ensures a more representative and diverse cabinet. Therefore, it was more suitable to the Indian needs. The presidentialization means a shift towards the presidential form of government and the decline in the parliamentary control over executive. A trend towards the presidentialization is visible through the event-like style of election. Elections have now become person-centric and not the party-centric. For example, 2019 Lok Sabha election was fought with a focus on the prime ministerial candidate. People voted for the executive and not the legislator. One person taking all the decisions. The major decisions are taken individually or consulting only a few close aid. For example, during demonetization, only few people had prior information. Extensive use of the ordinances making power of the president as a way around parliamentary process. The passage of the important bills without discussion. For instance, the 2018 finance bill was passed by the Lok Sabha within 18 months without the discussion. The recent scrapping of the question hour decreases the parliamentary accountability. Despite the trend towards the presidentialization, the roots of the parliamentary form of government is well founded. The constitution has provided various mechanisms and the institutions to preserve the parliamentary form of government. Supreme Court has also held that the parliamentary form of government forms the basic structure of the constitution. The people of India are resilient enough to protect its democratic principle as shown during the emergency era and the subsequent win of the Janata Party. How far do you agree that Constitution of India is federal in the structure and unitary in the spirit? Justify your answer with a suitable example. The federal structure divides the power between the national and the regional government, whereas in the unitary polity, all the powers are vested in the national government. Indian constitution is said to be quasi-federal (KCVRA) as it has the federal features with a unitary spirit. Important federal features of Indian constitution include the dual polity, which is consisting of the union and the state with the division of powers. Powers are divided between the two under state, union and concurrent list. The written constitution, Indian constitution is written specifying structure, power, function and limits of both the center and the state. The rigid constitution. It is rigid as it allows amendment of the federal structure only through the joint action of the center and the state with the approval of half of the states. The constitutional supremacy. Constitution is the supreme law of the land and center and states must operate within the jurisdiction prescribed by the constitution. Independent judiciary. An independent judiciary to interpret the constitution and settle the federal dispute. Bicameralism. Rajya Sabha maintained the federal equilibrium by protecting the interest of the state against the undue interference of the center. Thus, the Indian constitution has all the essential features of a federal polity. However, the Indian constitution also possesses the unitary spirit. As the single flexible constitution with a strong center, there is only a single constitution with a no separate state constitutions. Constitution is flexible as most of the provisions can be amended by the unilateral parliamentary action that establish the strong center, as only center can initiate a constitutional amendment. An emergency can convert the federal structure into unitary structure. The division of the power is in the center favor. The governor is appointed and removed by the president. Destructible states with a no equality of representation. Parliament can change the area boundaries of any state unilaterally. Also, the states are given unequal representation in the Rajya Sabha. Single citizenship. Unlike the other federal states like the US, India allows only single citizenship with a no separate state citizenship. Integrated judiciary that enforces both the central and the state laws. Other unitary features: the presence of the All India Services, appointment and removal of the CAG and the election commissioners. The handling of the COVID-19 crisis, where the center invoked the Disaster Management Act to impose a national lockdown, showed the unitary nature of the constitution. However, the subsequently states were given the freedom to impose a restricted lockdown, showing the respect for the federal principles of the Indian polity. Thus, the Indian Constitution is a federal document with a unitary bias. The federation is based in the favor of the center, but this does not reduce the value of the state. Both the center and the states are meant to work together on the principle of cooperative federalism. Examine the utility of the parliamentary committee in ensuring the accountability of the executive to the parliament. Discuss in this context the role of the public account committee. The parliamentary committee are the smaller deliberative bodies drawn from the members of the parliament to assist the parliament in the discharge of the duties. The parliamentary committees are eyes, ears, and hands of the legislature and sometimes become the brain of the house too. Parliamentary committees have a financial होती हैं, standing, ad hoc, select committee, administration committee. फाइनेंशियल में देखो तुम्हारा पीएसी है, एस्टिमेट्स है, पीएसयू है, ठीक है. स्टैंडिंग कमेटी में तुम्हारा कमिटी ऑन द रेलवे हेल्थ, एड हॉक सेलेक्ट कमेटी में सेलेक्ट कमेटी ऑन जीएसटी और फिर एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन कमेटी में बिजनेस एडवाइजरी, ठीक है, रूल्स प्रिविलेजेस कमेटी आती हैं. They play a very important role in ensuring the accountability of the executive in the following ways. The financial accountability. The parliamentary committees examine the budget, demand of the expenditure allocation, trend, policy priorities, spending at the ministerial level. The detailed scrutiny. Since the committees meet throughout the year, they help make up for the lack of the time in the parliament and help in the depth scrutiny. The technical expertise. The committee can consult a range of the stakeholders, including scientists, domain experts, etc., for better the understanding of the issue and facilitate the informed debate. Parliamentary committees have the closed door meetings that allow them to freely question the executive, rising above the party lines. Action taken report. They examine the policy issues and make the suggestion to the government. The government has to report back on the action taken, thus holding the government accountable. However, there are some shortcomings too, like recommendations are not binding on the executive. The most committees are constituted for the 1 year only. The low attendance of the MPs at the meetings of the committee. Examination of a bill by a committee is not compulsory. Only 25% of the bill introduced were referred to by the committee in the 16th Lok Sabha. Too many ministries under the single committee. The Public Account Committee is a financial committee of Parliament which is consisting of 22 members, 15 from the Lok Sabha and 7 from the Rajya Sabha, elected for the 1 year term. Plays very important role in ensuring accountability of the executive as follows. Examine the annual audit reports of the CAG and reports its finding to the Parliament. PSC act as a watchdog of the public purse by examining the audit report on the appropriation account and the finance account. The account of the state corporations, manufacturing units and the trade concerns are examined by the committee. Examines the public expenditure from the point of the view of the economy, prudence, wisdom and the property to bring out the case of the waste, loss, corruption, extravagance and inefficiency. However, there are some drawbacks. जैसे it mainly does a post-mortem examination. Its recommendations are advisory and not binding on the ministers. There is a no scope of dissent as all the decisions are taken by the consensus and it is not concerned with the policy decisions cannot issue an order and only parliament can take a decision on its finding. There is a need to further strengthen the parliamentary committee including the PAC. Their proceedings should be made more transparent and all the laws should necessarily be referred to the parliamentary committee to improve the quality of the parliamentary deliberations. वो कहीं ले तो नहीं गया है? फिर क्या है क्वेश्चन नंबर 4. Although higher judiciary command respect and the enjoys confidence of the public, the lower courts are seen as inefficient, untrustworthy, and corrupt. Why does the perception of the general public diverge in this regard despite having integrated judicial system? See, Constitution of India जो है provides for a single integrated judicial system, implying that structure of the judiciary is pyramid, with the Supreme Court at the top, High Court, and below them district subordinate courts at the lowest level. The Supreme Court and the High Court together call the High Courts, whereas the lower courts include the district and subordinate courts. The lower courts function under the superintendence of the higher court. Despite this, there is a difference in perception between the two because of the following reason. The lower courts are the first point of interaction for seeking justice. The lack of resources, vacant position of the judges, high case load, and the manual allocation of the dates for hearing create opportunity for the corruption and the rent seeking. And this gives a very poor experience for the general public, creating negative perception about the lower judiciary. The proceedings of the higher court are under the constant media coverage that ensure accountability which is missing in the lower court. Failure to attract the talent. The lower court judges have the dim career progression prospect and the lower salary. Failure to attract the talent affects the quality of decision. Higher courts recruit directly from the bar, which is a vibrant pool of practicing lawyers. For example, more than half of the high court judges are recruited from the bar, whereas in the lower courts there is a multiplicity of the exams with the different benchmarks, as each state conducts its own exam. The contempt power. Lower judiciary do not have the power to scrutinize a person for the contempt of court, but the higher courts have this power. Infrastructure. The lower courts suffer from the infrastructure shortage like the courtrooms, judges' chamber, library, conference rooms, etc. It affects the working of the court. The lack of basic amenities like the clean washroom and drinking water for the common people make the experience with the lower judiciary unpleasant. The perception of the public can be improved for the lower court by single recruitment exam conducted by National Testing Agency for all the state, the competitive salary at the lower level to attract the talent, using information technology for increasing efficiency in the proceedings, ensuring basic infrastructure development at the lower court. The Nani Palkiwala famously said, "Justice in India is a snail. It moves at a pace that would be regarded as unduly slow in a community of snails." This needs to change, and the point to begin with should be lower courts, as here the majority of the cases are filed. Though the RTI was meant to strengthen the participatory democracy in India, the various factors have hindered its utilization to full potential. In this context, we have to examine the issues pertaining to implementation of the RTI Act. The Right to Information Act 2005 confers the statutory right on the citizen of India to ask for the information from the government and public offices. It seeks to strengthen the participatory democracy in India by ensuring access to public information. However, a 6% fall was reported in the RTI application filed between 1516 and 1617. Various factors have hindered the utilization of RTI to its full potential include lack of awareness. According to the survey of RTI Assessment and Advocacy Group Draft 2013. Less than 35% people in the rural and 40% people in the urban areas are aware of the act. The knowledge of the entire process of seeking information is known to even less. The huge backlog. More than 2.2 lakh cases are pending at both the central and the state level. High rejection rate. A huge number of applications, nearly 4 out of every 10 on an average, are rejected under different sections, mostly on the vague grounds. The issues related to secrecy. Conflict with the Official Secret Act 1923 and Evidence Act lead to supersession of important information. The misuse of certain clauses, for instance Section 2H, is often invaded by the government by denying the public authority status to certain bodies as seen in the case of PM CARES Fund. The lag enforcement power. The CIC, the Chief Information Commissioner, has minimal power with respect to enforcement of the RTI Act that make it a toothless institution. For example, decision bringing political parties under RTI. The recent amendment in the RTI Act increased the power of central government substantial over central and the State Information Commission, negatively affecting the autonomy and neutrality. In order to improve the overall functioning of the RTI, the following steps could be taken. 3 out of 10 positions for the Information Commissioner are laying vacant, and filling up the vacancy will help in reducing backlog. Rationalization of the certain laws, which must include consolidation of the Act like the OPA, MISA, among others that often conflict with the RTI under one National Security Act. The repeal of the Official Secrets Act 1923 Second ARC. The revision of the Section 123 of the Indian Evidence Act of 1972, the Shori Committee. Independence. The fixed tenure and salaries can ensure independence of the Commission, Second ARC and the Shori Committee. Administrative reforms. Amend the Central Civil Services Conduct Rule to match with the spirit of the RTI Second ARC. NCRWC recommend that the oath of the transparency of ministers must replace the oath of secrecy. The protection of activists. The Whistleblowers Protection Act must be revived and empowered periodically to protect the activists. The need is to visit the current RTA regime for making necessary course correction, thus preserve the sanctity of transparency and the accountability for ensuring good governance. Part of the incapacity of the local bodies to function effectively stem from the inability to raise the finance of their own. Examine. Local bodies are the institutions of the self-governance at the local level, village and urban areas set up by the 73rd and 74th Amendment to strengthen the grassroots participatory democracy. The local bodies are empowered to raise their own revenue through the local taxes. However, so far, the local governments have been unable to raise the finances of their own. According to Economic Survey 2017-18, panchayats generate only 5% of their revenue and depend on the central and the state devolution. This inability to raise the local revenue has impacted functioning of the local government in the following ways. Project reluctance. With the less fund, local governments are reluctant to take on the projects that require any meaningful financial outlay and are often unable to solve the local governance need. Policy implementation. Local governments are responsible for the healthcare, water supply, sanitation, etc., for which they lack funds. And due to lack of own funds and lesser autonomy in spending, they are unable to implement welfare policies effectively. Local involvement. Without fiscal autonomy and decentralization, they are unable to operate like elected governments. As a result, local communities are unable to engage with the process of planning and accountability. Salary delays. Insufficient funds translate into salary delays for employees and affect the services and demotivates the worker to work efficiently. Following steps are needed to help the local government to raise the finance of their own. State action. The state governments must act in accordance with the Article 243H in devolving greater taxation power to the local bodies. Increase property tax collection. Use of technology for effective property tax collection using GIS mapping, cross-checking with the building licenses, ration cards, etc. Local fee or charges. Local charges have immense potential in the increasing revenue such as recovery on the use of charges, water, etc. The right of the way from the gas, electricity, cell tower charges, leasing electricity poles, etc. Participatory funding. The potential of the participatory funding, private sector, CSR and the local community needs to be tapped as has been done by the Bangalore, Ahmedabad, Mathura hybrid annuity project, Indore and Pune. The constitutional amendments, suitable revisions are needed for the mandatory devolution of the power from the state to the local bodies for empowering the local bodies. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought to light the importance of the local government and the grassroots governance. The only long-term solution to make them function effectively is to foster the genuine fiscal federalism, whereas they are unable to raise a large portion of their own revenue and face hard budget constraints. That is the fiscal autonomy accompanied by the fiscal responsibility. Examine the concept of separation of the power. Why the strict separation of power is not feasible or practical for a country like India. The doctrine of the separation of the power given by the Montesquieu is a principle for division of power and responsibility between the different organs of the state, that is, legislature, executive, and judiciary. The doctrine states that each organ of the state should have the exclusive and clearly defined roles and responsibility which are independent of the other two organs. And this doctrine ensures that there is no concentration of the power in a single authority. Once the branch does not interfere with the working of the other two branches, there is no conflict between the working of the different organs of the state. Although the doctrine of the separation of the power is not explicitly mentioned in the Indian Constitution, it is reflected in the constitutional provision like the Article 50 that provides that the state shall take steps to separate the judiciary from the executive. Article 122 that prohibits the courts to inquire into the parliamentary proceedings, etc. However, the strict separation of the power is not feasible or practical in India because of parliamentary form of government. Executive is drawn from and is part of the legislature. It is responsible to the legislature for the action. In parliamentary system like India, the strict SOP is not possible. The check and the balance system. There is a system of the oversight to prevent the arbitrary use of power. For example, judiciary using a tool of judicial review, ordinance making power of executive, and its approval by the legislature, etc. More accountable government. In practice, the legislature does not act merely as a law-making body but also act as an overseer of the executive. Tools like the budget approval, no confidence motion, parliamentary committees, etc., are meant to ensure a responsible government. Adherence to the doctrine of the SOP is difficult in the welfare state. India faces many complex socio-economic problems that require cooperation among various organs of the state. Constitutionally mandated role of judiciary. The constitutional role of judiciary includes judicial review and the duty to do complete justice. This makes it necessary for the judiciary to venture into the domain of the executive and the legislature. The presence of the contempt power with the legislature, quasi-judicial body like the tribunal, delegated legislations, etc., make the strict SOP impractical for India. The Supreme Court in the case of Nanda Bharati case 1973 pronounced that the doctrine of the separation of the power is a basic feature of constitution, but the doctrine of SOP is included in the constitution with the modification adopting a system of checks and balances. What is the mandate of the Securities and Exchange Board of India? How will consolidation of the provision of SEBI Act 1992, Depositories Act 1996, Securities Contract Regulation Act 1956, and the Government Securities Act 2007 into a single securities market code benefiting the functioning of the SEBI? The Securities and Exchange Board of India is a security and commodity market regulator in India. It was established in 1989 to protect the interests of the investors in the securities and promote the development and regulation of the securities market. As per its mandate, as per its mandate of the SEBI has three roles, namely the protective, regulatory, and developmental in the securities market. Protective, checking price rigging, insider trading, fraudulent and unfair trade practices, promote fair market practices, create awareness among the investors. Regulatory, setting guidelines for the functioning of the financial intermediaries and the corporates in the capital market, regulation of the takeover of the companies, conducting inquiries and the audit of exchange, registration of the brokers, sub-brokers, merchant banker, etc., registering, regulating credit rating agency, development, imparting training to intermediaries, promotion of the fair trading and reduction of malpractices, research work, encouraging self-regulating organization. The budget 2021-2022 has recently announced the consolidation of the provision of SEBI Act 1992, Depositories Act 1996, SCRA 1956, and Government Securities Act 2007 into a single securities market code, and this could benefit the functioning of SEBI as follows. Checking regulatory overlap. A unified code would help in clarification of regulatory jurisdiction of various agencies like the SEBI, NFRA, IRDAI, thus helping check the regulatory overlaps as seen recently between SEBI and IRDAI and SEBI and NFRA. Transparency. A single security code could make the compliances efficient, economical, and transparent, instill confidence in investors. Removal of the regulatory bottleneck, better functioning of the SEBI could help to instill the confidence among the domestic and the foreign investors. A reformed security market code can make the enforcement of the regulation simple and reduce the litigation. The global best practices. An empowered regulator with a diversified mandate is in the line with the practices in the developed nations. For instance, the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States not only regulates the security markets but also overlooks the consumer protection and accounting firm. The ease of doing business. A single security market code would reduce the compliance cost friction between the stakeholders, avoid multiple regulators, and provide the policy clarity to the investors, thereby allowing India to ascend on the ease of business leader. The securities market code with the SEBI as a regulator might go the long way in the simplification of the securities laws towards the steady development and enhanced integrity of the securities and the capital markets and the protection of the investor interest. While there are concerns regarding the creation of a super regulator, the creation of a transparent system with the checks and balances might ensure the performance of the code at par with the expectations. Indian experience shows that promises made in the Citizen Charter have become more pious declarations with no mechanism to enforce them. In this context, enumerate the challenges and the implementation of a successful Citizen Charter. Also suggest the measures to make it effective. Citizens Charter is a document of the government commitment to public with respect to services provides or to be provided to them. Its basic objective is to make administration citizen centric and empower citizens by bridging the information gap and make the governance transparent, accountable and citizen friendly. Indian experience shows that the citizen charters have become a virtual dead letter with the pious sentiments of the intention. The public of a center serve reveals that most of the citizen charter suffers from the unfamiliarity among the official, the lack of grievance redressal in the charter, and the lack of periodic review. ठीक Falling are the reason for the ineffectiveness of the citizen charter in India. The poor design, unclear vision, absence of a critical information, poor definition, the lack of grievances redressal mechanism make the charter useless for the public. The measurable standards of the delivery are rarely defined. The lack of awareness, inadequate publicity, complex terminology, illiteracy, etc. make citizen charter unknown to public. The lack of statutory support. Citizen charters are not supported by any law and they are non-justiciable, making it more formality. The lack of consultation. The stakeholders like the end users, civil society organizations and NGOs are not consulted when the charters are drafted. The lack of periodic review. The charters are not updated regularly, making it one-time exercise with no change over decades. The linguistic gap. Most charters are prepared either in English or in Hindi with very less emphasis on translation in vernacular language. Even translated charters contain linguistic error, creating confusion. Inadequate grievance redressal. The details of the public grievances officer are not provided in many charters. The citizen charters need transformation in the terms of content, design, and objectives. Following are the changes suggested for the same. Clear vision statement. Citizen charter should carry a clear statement of the vision framed after an open and consultative process involving all the stakeholders. The specification of the time frame. There should be a clear commitment about the time frame for the service delivery and grievances redress. Specification of the quality standard. Charter must indicate the specific quality standard to which organization is committed, which will enable the citizen to keep the organization accountable. Information about the processes to access the services. Efforts must be made to translate the charter in the local language. Charter must provide information about the procedures involved in obtaining the services and facilitate the citizens to obtain it. The grievances redressal. The Charter should encourage the citizen to complain that grievances and organizations should aspire to redress these. Charter should clearly lay down the grievances redressal procedure. In addition to the above measures, some of the best practices can be followed. For instance, Sevotam model of the postal department can be replicated in other departments. This will make the citizen charter an effective document for the good governance. The biggest weakness of the civil service today is its inability to function with integrity and political neutrality. Critically examined. See, integrity जो है is a quality of a civil servant of I following a set of moral principle. मम्मा मेरा खाना रख दो मैं अभी आधे घंटे बाद खाऊंगी. Integrity is the quality of a civil servant of following a set of moral principles like the honesty, accountability, selflessness, etc. The political neutrality is the quality of serving the government of the day without any personal politic bias. In the recent times, inability to function with integrity and political neutrality has been identified as the biggest weakness civil service. And this weakness is highlighted through the example like ex-commissioner of the Mumbai alleged that he was asked to collect 100 crore per month by the Home Minister of the state and use of the police against the leader and the cadre of the opposition party like in UP and the WB, favoritism while appointment to the top post and reshuffling of the bureaucracy after regime change post-election. The main reason for the inability to function with the integrity and political neutrality are low pay scale and high monetary reward of corruption, lack of transparency and the weak accountability mechanism. Deep-rooted system corruption that originated during the colonial times, many honest officers succumbed to systemic pressure. Top government posts are filled on the basis of discretion of ministers. Transfers and the postings are controlled by the political masters. Personal opinion related to the politics seeping into the public life and the political ambitions after retirement dilutes the political neutrality. Although criticized for the lack of integrity and political neutrality, civil services also suffer from the other weaknesses that limit their performance, like complex social and political situations that restrict the scope of action that can be taken. Deficit of the human resources, poorly trained staff, complex rule and regulation, lack of adequate resources like the finances, computer, vehicle, office infrastructure, etc. Despite such weakness, there are still an example of the civil servant working with integrity and politically neutrality. For example, Ashok Khemka, known for his integrity despite several punishment postings. Late IPS Ravi Kumar stood against mafia and NP and sacrificed his life while doing utmost service for nation. T.N. Seshant remained political neutral during his career and post-retirement as well. To address the weakness discussed above, following reforms can be undertaken: constitution of the Civil Service Board to stop the punishment and the random posting of the officer, promotion of the performance budgeting to instill the accountability among the civil servant as recommended by the second ERC, lateral entry and exit for the private sector managers and the public non-performance respectively, the check on corruption using the Central Vigilance Commission Lokpal, and implementing Prevention of Corruption Act in the letter and the spirit. NCRWC Hota Committee 2004 Second ARC has also suggested these reforms, so speedy implementation of these can ensure the institutional integrity and impartiality in the civil services. Tribunals have been instrumental in providing alternate avenues for the delivery of justice. In this context, critically examine the tribunal, appellate tribunal, and other authorities, Rules 2020. Tribunals are the quasi-judicial bodies that are set up to adjudicate the specific matters related to administrative Article 323A or such other aspect Article 323B. The tribunals were constituted with the objective of delivering speedy, inexpensive and decentralized adjudication of dispute in the various matters. They play a very key role in providing alternate avenues for the justice delivery by providing specialization in education of the subject related matters, disburdening the judiciary which is overburdened with more than 3 crore pending cases, ensuring the enforcement of preventive measures as seen in ban on cracker, cleaning Ganga, etc. by NGT, and being more accessible through the various benches in the different regions. Over the years, to ease access to justice, many tribunals have been created, but each tribunal has its own set of rule and procedure, creating confusion. To address this, the government has recently framed the new tribunal appellate tribunal and other authorities' qualification, experience, and other conditions of the Service of the Members Rule 2020 with an aim to prescribe uniform norms for the appointment and service condition of the members to various tribunal. These are revised rules after 2017 rules were struck down as unconstitutional by Supreme Court in the Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank case 2019. The rules pertain to various aspects including qualification of members, method of recruitment, removal of a member, procedure for inquiry of misbehavior or incapacity, salary and allowances, among others such aspects. However, certain concerns have been raised regarding the rules, and these are predominance of the executive. According to the new rules, a president chairperson of the tribunal can be a member of the selection committee that might lead to dominance of the executive in the selection process over judiciary. Sidelining the bright lawyers. The rules hold only the lawyers with an experience of more than 25 years as eligible for the post of judicial member in the tribunal, thereby sidelining many bright young lawyers capable of holding such a position. The dilution of the judicial rule. The selection committee can function even in the absence of the judicial members that signify the sufficiency of the executive in the selection process. Principles of the natural justice breached. The new rules ensure that the secretary of the ministry against which the tribunal is to pass order sits on the committee for selecting adjudicating member of the same tribunal. The generalist over the specialist. The rules use the ambiguous clauses stating that any person with the experience in economics, commerce and management industry and admin can be appointed as a member of certain tribunal and allow for even non-judicial members to be a member, thus sidelining the aspect of specialization in the tribunals. Judicial independence. The rules remove the bar on the employment with the government after retiring from the tribunals, thus flagging the concerns of the judicial independence. The tribunals must function not as an extension of executive but as a judicial institution functioning on the principles of natural justice. The need therefore is to ease the access to justice without diluting the principle of separation of power as present in the case of constitutional setup. The freedom of the speech would mean very little if it were not able to respond to political, social, and technological changes discussed. The freedom of the speech is a fundamental right that entails every person has a natural right to freely express themselves through any media and without outside interferences such as censorship and without the fear of reprisal such as threat and prosecution. Article 19(1) of the Indian Constitution guarantees all the citizens the right to freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of the speech is an important part of democracy. However, this freedom would mean very little if it were not able to respond to the political, social, and technological changes as described below. Social changes. Boycotting hatred and intolerance. The freedom of the speech is important to raise the voice against the hatred and intolerance against a particular community. If not allowed, it leads to social tension and conflict. For example, rejecting the hate speech and embracing the free speech, ensuring pluralism. Freedom of the speech reflects and reinforces the pluralism, ensuring that diversity is validated and promoting the self-esteem of those who follow a particular lifestyle. Social progress. Free speech is an integral aspect of everyone's right to self-development and the fulfillment. It also needs to be utilized to raise the consciousness towards the social evil like the caste discrimination, gender-based violence, etc. Practical challenge. Authoritarian tendencies. With increasing authoritarian tendencies and majoritarian government, freedom of the speech is very important. It allows the people to raise their voices and prevent democracy turning into autocracy. For example, invocation of the Sedition Act by the government against journalists on raising the issue of misgovernance. The protection of the minorities. The democracy is directed by the will of the majority. However, a democracy also needs to ensure through the free speech that a democracy does not turn into a tyranny of the majority and prevent the persecution of the minorities. The policy debates. In a democracy, freedom of the speech open challenges of the free discussion of issues. The freedom of the speech plays a very crucial role in the formation of public opinion on the social, political, economic matters and bring about the change in the nation. The technological changes. The rise of the social media has opened a new debate regarding the extent of the freedom of the speech and reasonable restrictions. For example, balancing between the freedom of expression on the social media and Section 66A of the IT Act, which criminalizes the sending of offensive messages through the computer or use of social media for fundamentalist indoctrination of the youth. Free speech would be futile if the people are not able to speak against any use of technology which affect the people negatively. For example, violation of the privacy access to internet. Ensure the ethical standards of a society that may be threatened by the technology. For example, child pornography. Regulation of over-the-top online media and the content that shows nudity and extreme violence in the name of artistic freedom. Constitution has investigate reasonable restriction to balance the people right and law and order. The framers of the Constitution adopted the freedom of the speech and expression as a fundamental right to facilitate and promote the free expression and exchange of the ideas and information. The freedom of the speech means empowerment of the citizen to not only speak of their mind but also to ongoing changes and expose any threat. Changing nature of the society, politics and technology demand extra effort and the consciousness from the states while imposing any restriction on the freedom of the speech. In what ways is the Indian approach to secularism different from that which is followed by the France? Is Indian secularism better suited to its socio-religious condition? Justify your answer. See, secularism is a principle that prescribes the separation of the state and the religion. In India, the term secularism secular was added to the preamble by the 42nd Constitution Amendment. The laicide is a constitutional principle of the secularism in France. Secularism under French Constitution is commonly interpreted as discouraging religious involvement in the government affairs, especially the religious influence in the determination of the state politics. There are various differences in the French and Indian secularism as discussed below. The French secularism is based on the wall of separation principle provide for the formal separation of the church and the state. The French secularism does not preclude any right to free excuse of the religion. It restricts and replaces the religious value from the public space with the values such as liberty, equality, and fraternity. Okay, we'll discuss this question in the next video. Question number 13 we'll discuss in the next video. Okay, going for dinner. Thank you.